Break through the white noise and see the world through a prism of intense color and raw, unfiltered emotion. We show you every shade of the human experience through stunning 3D cinematic visuals. Click subscribe now and start seeing the world in a whole new light.
She was standing in the doorway of my hospital room, and she didn't know I was awake. I could see her through the narrow gap between my eyelids, just enough to watch without being seen. She was talking to the nurse at the station down the hall, her voice low and careful, the way she always talked when she wanted something. My best friend of 11 years. The person who had my emergency contact saved in her phone. The person who, 4 days ago, had driven away and left me bleeding on the side of Route 9 inches the dark. Her name was Cara, and she wasn't there to see if I was okay. I knew that the moment I saw her eyes scan the room, not looking at me, not checking for monitors or machines or signs of life. She was looking at my bedside table, at the small drawer where she knew I kept my phone, at the folder the nurse had left on the chair by the window. She was looking at my things. Let me go back. Because you need to understand what the last 3 years of my life looked like before you can understand what happened in that hospital room. I met Cara in college. We were 21, assigned to the same study group for a sociology class neither of us cared about, and by the end of that semester we were inseparable. She was the kind of person who filled every room she walked into, loud and funny and magnetic in a way I never quite was. I was quieter. More careful. I had a small scholarship, a part-time job at a coffee shop, and a very precise budget I kept in a notebook. Cara had a trust fund she never talked about directly but referenced constantly the trips her parents paid for, the apartment they covered, the car that was technically in her father's name. We balanced each other out. That's what I told myself for years. What I didn't see, or maybe what I refused to see, was that the balance was never equal. I gave. Cara took. Not dramatically. Not all at once. In small, reasonable-sounding increments that I never added up until it was too late. It started with money. The way it usually does. $100 here because she was short on rent. A plane ticket there because she really wanted me at her cousin's wedding in Savannah, and she'd pay me back when her dad's check cleared. Concert tickets. A security deposit. A car repair. Each one came with an explanation that made perfect sense in the moment, and then quietly disappeared from her memory the moment the crisis passed. By the time I was 28, Cara owed me somewhere around $40,000. I know that sounds like a number I should have noticed sooner, but it crept up the way debt always does slowly. Then, all at once. And every time I thought about bringing it up, I heard her voice in my head telling me I was being transactional, that real friends didn't keep score, that I of all people should understand what it was like to struggle. She knew how to use my compassion against me. That was her real talent. The accident happened on a Tuesday in November. We had driven out to a vineyard about 40 minutes outside the city for a friend's birthday dinner, one of those long wine-soaked evenings that stretches past midnight without anyone meaning it to. He hadn't drunk much. I almost never did at events like that, because I was usually the one who ended up driving. Cara had 2 glasses of wine, and then switched to cocktails, and then told me at 11:30 that she was absolutely fine to drive. I said I would drive. She didn't argue. We were about 15 minutes from my apartment when the deer came out of nowhere, a flash of eyes in the headlights and then the wheel jerking, the car sliding sideways on the wet road, the guardrail coming up fast. The impact wasn't catastrophic. The airbags didn't even deploy. But the car spun into the ditch on the passenger side, and when I tried to move, the pain in my left shoulder and ribs told me to stop. I said Cara's name. She answered. She sounded shaken but okay. I said, "Can you call 911? I think I'm hurt," she said. Yeah, of course. I closed my eyes. The pain was making it hard to think. I heard her door open the passenger side, which took effort because of the angle. And I heard her moving around outside the car. I assumed she was getting a better signal. I assumed she was on the phone with a dispatcher. I assumed, because she was my best friend of 11 years, that she was handling it. I don't know exactly when I lost consciousness. The paramedics told me later that a truck driver passing on the highway had spotted the car in the ditch and called it in. He estimated he'd seen it about 25 minutes after the accident. Cara was not there when he stopped. Her purse was gone. Her phone was gone. She had left. I spent 2 days in the ICU with 3 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and a moderate concussion. I also had mild hypothermia, because November in that part of the country is not forgiving, and I had been unconscious in a wrecked car for the better part of half an hour before anyone found me. When I woke up, the first thing I did was ask for my phone. The nurse told me it had been found in the cup holder of the car, and was in my personal belongings bag. The second thing I did was check my messages. Cara had texted me at 12:04 a.m. That was approximately 15 minutes after I'd asked her to call for help. The text said, "Something came up. Hope you're okay. Talk soon." I read it 3 times. I read it the way you read something that doesn't make sense, waiting for the meaning to rearrange itself into something you can accept. Something came up. I set the phone down on my chest and stared at the ceiling for a long time. There was a woman named Dr. Patricia Chen who oversaw my care during those first 2 days. She was calm and precise, and had the kind of eyes that didn't miss much. On my second morning, she came in for rounds, and found me sitting up in bed with my phone in my hand, and an expression on my face that apparently told her something. She asked the resident to step out. Then she sat down in the chair by the window and asked me, quietly, what was going on. I don't entirely know why I told her everything. Maybe it was the concussion. Maybe it was the fact that I'd spent 2 days alone in a hospital room with nothing to do but think. Maybe it was just that she asked in a way that made it clear she actually wanted to know. I told her about Cara, about the money, about the accident, about the text. Dr. Chen listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you have a will?" I said yes. I'd had one drawn up 2 years earlier when I'd inherited a small amount of money from my grandmother, a life insurance policy, modest but real, and a savings account I'd been careful with. She asked if Cara was named in it. I said no. But she was my emergency contact. And she knew, because I had told her years ago during a conversation about estate planning, that I was one of those morbid 20-somethings who had her affairs in order, that I had a life insurance policy with a payout of $250,000. She knew because I had trusted her with that information the way you trust your best friend with the quiet, serious parts of your life. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. She said, "I'd like to suggest something. You don't have to agree, but I want you to think about it." What she suggested was something I later learned was adapted from a protocol sometimes used in domestic violence situations, a way of making a patient's presence at a facility effectively invisible to people calling or visiting, without authorization. She also recommended I contact my attorney immediately, before Cara had a chance to do anything with the emergency contact status she held on my records. I called my attorney that afternoon. His name was Marcus Webb, and he had handled my grandmother's estate and therefore knew exactly what I had and where it was. I told him what happened. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, in the tone of someone who has seen a great many things, "Give me 24 hours. What Marcus did in those 24 hours I only learned about piece by piece over the following weeks. He contacted my insurance company and flagged the policy. He had my emergency contact status quietly updated so that Cara's name no longer appeared in my active records. He made 2 calls. I still don't know the full details of. And then he drove to the hospital and sat with me for 2 hours and explained, very carefully, what my options were. He also said something I have thought about many times since. He said, "People who leave someone in a ditch and then go home and sleep don't usually come back out of guilt. They come back when they realize there's something to lose." I asked him what he meant. He said, "She'll come. Give her a few days." He was right. She came on day 4. I knew she was there before I saw her, because the nurse, a woman named Diane, who had become, over 4 days, something close to a guardian, came into my room, with an expression that told me something was happening. She said, quietly, that a woman matching the description I'd given had arrived at the nurse's station and was asking questions about me. Not about how I was doing, about my status, about who had medical decision-making authority. I felt something go very still inside me. I said, "Let her come back." Diane looked at me carefully. Then she nodded. Marcus was already in the building. He had been there since that morning, working from a chair in the family waiting room, because he had agreed with Dr. Chen that there was a reasonable probability Cara would show up, and that it would be better if he was present. There was also, I learned when Cara walked into my room, a detective named Ray Okafor, sitting in the chair beside my bed wearing street clothes and reviewing paperwork on a clipboard, looking for all the world like a hospital social worker. Cara didn't notice him at first. She was looking at me. I was sitting up in bed. I had brushed my hair. I had asked Diane to take away the extra monitors and the more dramatic-looking equipment, so the room looked calmer than it was. I wanted Cara to feel like she had control of the situation. She stopped in the doorway. For just a moment, half a second, maybe less, something moved across her face, something I had to be watching carefully to catch. It was not relief. It was not guilt. It was recalculation. Then she stepped into the room and her face rearranged itself into the expression I had seen 1,000 times. Warm, concerned, slightly breathless, like she'd rushed here. "Oh my God," she said. "You have no idea how worried I've been." I said, "Sit down, Cara." She sat in the chair across from the bed, the chair closest to the window, the chair farthest from Detective Okafor, who she still hadn't really looked at. She started talking before I could say anything. She told me she'd panicked the night of the accident, that she hadn't been thinking clearly, that she'd walked up to the road to try to get a signal, and then somehow ended up at a gas station a mile away, and by the time she'd calmed down, she didn't know what to do, and she was scared. She talked for about 4 minutes. It was a good story. It had specific details. The gas station was a BP. The attendant was an older man. She'd tried to call, but her phone was at 2%. It had the texture of a true story. It was the kind of story Cara had always been very good at. When she finished, she leaned forward slightly and put her hand over mine on the blanket. She said, "I'm just so glad you're okay. That's all that matters." I looked at her hand on mine. I said, "Why did you come today, Cara?" She blinked. "What do you mean I came to see you? You've known I was in this hospital since at least Wednesday. The accident was Tuesday night. That's 3 days you knew and didn't come. I told you. I was scared. I didn't know how you'd—" "When you stopped at the nurse's station," I said, "you asked who had medical power of attorney over me. You asked about my decision-making status." I paused. Diane told me. Something happened in her face then. A shift too small for most people to name. But I had known Cara for 11 years, and I knew exactly what it was. It was the moment when the story she'd prepared stopped being useful. She started to say something. I kept going. "You knew about my life insurance policy," I said. "We talked about it. You're still listed as my emergency contact, and you thought that gave you some kind of standing. You came here to find out whether I was going to make it. Because if I wasn't, if I was incapacitated or worse, there were things you wanted to put in motion." The room was very quiet. Cara's hand was still on mine. She hadn't moved it. Her face had gone through several expressions very quickly, and had settled, finally, on something that wasn't quite any of them. A blankness that I recognized as the thing underneath all the other faces. The thing that was there when the performance ran out. She said, very carefully, "That's a serious thing to accuse me of." Detective Okafor set his clipboard down on his knee. He said, "Miss Harmon." Cara turned, and that was when she saw him, really saw him, the way she should have when she first walked in. She saw the way he was sitting. She saw the badge he was now holding in one hand, unhurried, like a man who has done this many times. He said, "I'm Detective Ray Okafor. I've been assigned to investigate the circumstances of the accident on Route 9 on November 12th. I'd like to ask you some questions." The color in Cara's face changed. I watched it happen. I had known, intellectually, that this moment was coming, but watching it arrive was something different. Her hand finally moved off mine. She said, slowly, "I want to call my attorney." Detective Okafor said, "That's absolutely your right. You're not under arrest. This is a voluntary conversation." He paused. "For now. I don't know exactly what happened in the hours and days after Cara walked out of my room with Detective Okafor. I know some of it from Marcus, some from the detective, some from the paperwork I was eventually shown. I know that the investigation into the accident uncovered, in addition to the questions about Cara leaving the scene, a set of other questions about the weeks leading up to it, questions about a conversation Cara had been recorded having with someone whose name I didn't recognize, about my estate, about what she might be entitled to. I know that leaving the scene of an accident in which someone is injured is a felony in that state. I know that the specific circumstances, her presence, her departure, my period of unconsciousness, made the situation significantly more serious than a simple failure to report. I know that Cara, eventually, took a plea that did not involve prison but did involve probation, community service, and a civil judgment in my favor that represented a fraction of what she actually owed me but was, Marcus explained, more than I would likely have gotten any other way. And I know that before any of that happened, before the lawyers, and the paperwork, and the long, exhausting process of dismantling 11 years of what I had called a friendship, I lay in a hospital bed and made a decision about who I was going to be on the other side of this. I want to talk about that decision, because I think it's the part people don't always tell you about. Everyone understands the anger, the betrayal, the specific, stomach-dropping horror of realizing that someone you trusted looked at your unconscious body in a ditch and made a calculation. I am not going to minimize that. It was real, and it was devastating, and there were nights in the months after the accident when it sat on my chest, like something physical. But the decision wasn't about anger. It wasn't about revenge, even though the word gets used for situations like this. The decision was simpler than that, and harder. I decided to stop measuring my worth by whether Cara recognized it. That sounds like a therapy line. Maybe it is. But here's what it meant in practice. I stopped replaying the conversations where I should have said something. I stopped auditing the years of dinners paid for and loans not repaid, and moments where I had swallowed my own needs because her needs seemed more urgent. I stopped trying to figure out when, exactly, the friendship had become something else. Because the when didn't matter. The now mattered. The what next mattered. I changed my emergency contact. I updated my will. I told 3 people. My mother, my coworker Jess, and my neighbor Mrs. Albright, who is 73, and has strong opinions about loyalty what had happened. Not everyone, just the people who needed to know. And who I trusted to hold it without turning it into something else. I started physical therapy for my shoulder in January. By March I was mostly back to myself. Or a version of myself. A quieter one, maybe. More careful about what I called friendship, and what was actually something else in a friendship's clothing. I left the city in April. Not because I was running. Because I had always wanted to live somewhere smaller and quieter, and the accident had clarified, with unusual precision, what I actually wanted my life to look like. I found a job in a town 3 hours away. I found an apartment with a yard. I got a dog, a 4-year-old hound mix named Clementine, who had been at the shelter for 8 months, and who now sleeps at the foot of my bed with absolute confidence in her right to be there. Cara texted me once, in February. The message said she hoped I was healing, and that she was sorry for everything. It was a careful text. The kind written with a lawyer in the room. I read it. I didn't respond. Not because I'm still angry, the anger, to my own surprise, has mostly quieted, but because forgiveness and response are not the same thing, and I had nothing I needed to say to her. There's a question I've seen in comments on videos like this one, and I want to answer it honestly. The question is, how do you not feel guilty? How do you let someone face consequences, and not spend the rest of your life second-guessing it? I don't know if there's a universal answer. For me, it came down to one thing. What happened in that ditch was not an accident. The accident was the deer, the wet road, the guardrail. What happened after that, the leaving, the calculating, the showing up 4 days later in my hospital room, to assess whether I was dead enough to be useful, that was a choice. A series of choices. And I was not responsible for the consequences of her choices. I was responsible for mine. So I chose to stop being the person who made it easy. I chose to let the discomfort of that be hers to carry. I chose Clementine, and the yard, and the small town, and the quieter version of myself. There are people in your life right now who know exactly what you have, and who are doing math you can't see. I don't say that to frighten you. I say it because I spent 11 years not wanting to believe it, and the believing cost me a lot less than the not believing. Know what you have. Know who you've told. Know that the emergency contact line on a form is not a formality. And if you have a Cara, start paying attention to the gap between what she says and what she does. That gap will tell you everything. My name is not the name I gave in this story. I changed it, along with a few details, for reasons I think you understand. But I'm real. The ditch was real. The cold was real. And I got out.